This is a very troublesome video to make, because my experience is that people instantly become hysterical when you have a complaint about society. Obviously, I have an amazing life. If I don't say that, people will invent that I would deny that, and would start talking about how I am complaining about first world problems. Obviously, many people are hungry and in danger of being killed. In the grand scope of things, my own sufferings, and in all likelihood your sufferings as well, are essentially minimal. So you have to state that it is not my goal to get you to feel bad for me or anything along those lines. I merely intend to use an example from my own life so that I can make a point about society. Also, I'm about to use controversial grammar. The Netherlands are famous for the bikes. It is conceivable that you have heard about the bike culture that we have going here. There is, for example, a YouTube channel by a guy who thinks the Netherlands are basically perfect in every conceivable way, and it is called Not Just Bikes, in reference to this well-known phenomenon of the Dutch riding bikes a lot. While there are many benefits to having a high bike culture, I have not experienced it as a blessing at all. So we have navigable cities and shit, and that is great. Here in the Netherlands we don't have a fucking racetrack going through our city like they have in America. But there's another thing that we don't have as part of the bike dependency package. We don't have school buses. Of course, there isn't 0 school buses total, as exceptional situations exist in some places and for some people. Usually people with a physical disability have access to a type of taxi service that is similar to the concept of a school bus. But for the most part, you have to go to school by bike. And this exacerbates regional inequality massively. Now, on the topic of regional inequality, the same thing applies as what I said a moment ago. Our suffering is minimal. Like abject poverty, like you see in other places in the world, does not exist here. We don't have slums or whatever. And if I don't point that out, a certain type of YouTube commenter is going to be at my throat. But really, regional inequality exists everywhere, and it does here too. And the lack of school buses creates a regional inequality that I, though it is not on par with the immense suffering elsewhere in the world, would describe as fucked. When living in the countryside, you have, of course, a lot of boring and inconsequential regional inequality. Like, for example, in the countryside, you won't have a cinema. To go to the cinema, you have to go to the nearest town that is city-like enough to have a cinema. But that is obviously an example of boring inequality. Nobody cares that much about movies anyways. Hospitals are another one. Like, sure, you are more likely to die when the hospital is like an hour away. But you can only die once in one lifetime, so most of the time it doesn't affect you. But for example, that you are likely to have a much longer commute when you live in the countryside, I would say does affect your life in a fairly serious degree. And children will have a version of this when going to school. I grew up in a shithole village. Luckily, it does have a primary school. There are other places that don't even have a primary school, so I did not get the deluxe shithole village childhood experience. But when you are about 12 years old, you go to secondary school. And for Dutch children that means that you are entering your cyclist era. This is pretty much always horrible. But the horridity of this obviously greatly depends on how backwatery your backwater is. My own situation, which in its specifics are ultimately not truly relevant, was thusly. The first section is from my shithole village to the ferry that will bring you across the river. After you have crossed the river and passed through another shithole village, you find yourself on a section that has no streetlights. Luckily, you are on what is basically dedicated bike infrastructure, though you may still encounter the occasional local traffic as well, like tractors, as it is not actually truly a bike lane but just a small local road. When it is early in the morning, it is truly dark here. Don't forget that this starts when you are 12 years old and it is basically always raining. After you've passed another shithole village, of which the generally held belief is that a lot of anti-vaxxers live there are streetlights again. you are still on a more or less dedicated bike lane right next to a main road. This part of the journey there is a good amount of trees that help tame the wind somewhat. Finally, you arrive in a town that is city-like enough to have a school. From here, the smallest number of traffic lights to arrive at the school is 2, though the most popular route is 5 traffic lights. Though it much depends on the wind, the full journey takes about 90 minutes, meaning 3 hours of cycling every fucking day. And again, especially in the morning, it is usually raining. It's not always pouring rain. In fact, truly heavy rainfall is actually quite rare, but for most of our teenage years, we'll be cycling in a drizzle, as that is typical to our climate. This is not regarded by Dutch society as a social problem. I'm not telling you this as an example of a social issue that Dutch politicians have been unable to solve, but as an example of a social problem that everyone knows about but ignores. Ignoring the children is normal to humans. Humans do not care about children and the ways in which we as a society harm them. Children do not matter, have no rights, and will be sacrificed on the altars of adult convenience. No politician ever will attempt to solve this issue, because once children are done going to school, they simply banish their unpleasant experience to the periphery of their consciousness and often become the exact same adults as their parents. People who wasted many cold and wet hours on their bicycle will themselves defend this social ill, saying stupid shit that this made them a man or whatever. I can earnestly say that while others may have become men because of it, I became a man despite of it. It did not make me stronger. In fact, I may well have gotten weaker. After 6 years, it had begun to weigh heavier on me than it did in even the first year. I did not become strong, and the journey did not become easy. Just like how not everyone has it in them to become like a scientist or whatever, not everyone has it in them to become an athlete. I grant that for some it is doable. For me it was not, and for many others it has been and will be the same. I, and undoubtedly many others, most sincerely hated every second of it, and I was generally quite miserable in this period of my life. And it most definitely is the fault of Dutch politicians and their flippant attitude towards children and the fucking countryside. This is the formative experience that shaped me. Arguably, it did make me a man in that sense. While some, or even many, developed a version of Stockholm Syndrome and came to accept it as a thing that we do to children in our culture, I became enlightened on the nature of humanity. I learned, firstly, that people who are done an injustice to often will develop a version of Stockholm Syndrome. And secondly, society literally does not give a shit about children. As I have lived on, both of these problems, of which I think everybody has a peripheral awareness, have been confirmed to me countless times. I think these two things are extremely universal, and I hope you will be able to notice them too.